It was supposed to be a normal day. My wife, 8 months pregnant, and I were heading to the car for a simple errand. The sun was shining, the air crisp, nothing out of the ordinary. But out of nowhere, a voice shouted across the parking lot. I turned just in time to see her, the infamous HOA Karen. With an angry glare in her eyes, she marched towards us. And before I could even blink, she grabbed my wife, my pregnant wife, and started dragging her across the parking lot like she was some kind of criminal. I was frozen for a moment, my mind racing. What was going on? What had just happened? Was this a misunderstanding? Or had Karen finally crossed a line she could never come back from? This wasn't just another HOA complaint. This was about to become something bigger. I never imagined that a simple trip to the parking lot could change everything. My wife, nearly 9 months pregnant, was beside me as we made our way toward the car, both of us lost in the excitement and anxiety that comes with waiting for the birth of our first child. Our neighborhood was usually quiet, peaceful even, and we never thought twice about walking through it. But today was different. Today, I witnessed something I could never have expected. Out of nowhere, the harsh voice of Karen, the infamous HOA enforcer, ripped through the calm air. She was marching towards us, eyes blazing with authority, and before I could even react, she had grabbed my wife's arm. My pregnant wife. What followed next was beyond shocking. It was downright terrifying. She began dragging my wife across the parking lot, ignoring every ounce of her discomfort, pain, and the fact that she was carrying our child. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could someone be so heartless? I had heard rumors about Karen, how she was always interfering in everyone's lives, controlling and overbearing, but this crossed a line I didn't know could even exist. As I rushed forward to stop her, I was hit with a wave of confusion and rage. Was this really happening? Was this woman really dragging my pregnant wife like this over a trivial dispute? The worst part? This was only the beginning of what would turn into a series of events that would change everything for us. It was a typical morning, the kind where everything seems calm and ordinary, almost too perfect. The sun was just starting to climb, casting soft golden light across the neighborhood. Birds chirped in the distance, and the world felt peaceful, just how it should be in a suburban neighborhood on a Saturday. My wife, Sarah, and I had planned a simple outing that day. We were preparing for the birth of our first child, and every moment counted. The excitement, the nerves, the anticipation, everything was building up, and it felt like time itself was moving in slow motion. We had just spent the morning finishing some last-minute shopping for baby clothes, and we were looking forward to a quiet afternoon at home. Sarah was nearly 8 months pregnant, and although she looked beautiful, I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Carrying our baby had taken its toll, and she was starting to feel the weight of it all. Every step was more deliberate than the last as she carefully walked beside me toward our car in the parking lot. I made sure to walk slower for her, always staying just close enough to offer a reassuring hand whenever she needed it. We laughed about the baby names we liked and the nursery decor, but beneath the light conversation was an undercurrent of nervous energy. The big day was getting closer, and it was hard not to feel the weight of it. As we reached the car, I noticed a figure in the distance. At first, it didn't register who it was. She was just another person in the neighborhood, until she started moving toward us with purpose, her footsteps quickening. My heart sank. It was Karen, the dreaded HOA enforcer. I've heard enough stories about her to know what was coming. Karen, the neighborhood busybody, the one who had made it her life's mission to enforce every single rule, no matter how small or insignificant. People dreaded seeing her, especially after she was elected to the HOA board. She had become an absolute tyrant in our little corner of the world. No one could park too close to a neighbor's driveway, no one could trim their hedges without a written request, and God forbid you put up a holiday decoration that wasn't approved. Karen had a way of making everyone's life miserable. And today, it seemed she had zeroed in on us. At first, I thought maybe she was just walking by, but no, she wasn't. She was heading straight for us, and before I could even process it, she opened her mouth. "Excuse me." Her voice was sharp, commanding, and carried a tone of authority that immediately set my teeth on edge. "What do you think you're doing parking here?" I turned to Sarah, my heart skipping a beat. She was already trying to get into the car, her hand on the door handle, and clearly not aware of what was unfolding. But the moment Karen spoke, I knew something was wrong. No one ever questioned parking here. It was a public lot, and as far as I knew, there were no issues with where we had parked. But Karen wasn't interested in logic. She had come to stir trouble. I took a step forward, trying to calm the situation before it escalated. "Karen, we're just getting into the car. We haven't done anything wrong." But Karen didn't stop. No, she didn't care for my explanation. Her eyes were already flashing with irritation. "Don't you tell me what's wrong. You know the rules. You think you can just park here like it's your private space?" Now, Sarah noticed the exchange, and I could see her tense up. She was already stressed from the pregnancy, and Karen's sudden aggression only made things worse. My protective instincts kicked in. I put myself between Karen and Sarah, trying to keep things from escalating further. "Karen," I said, my voice firm but controlled, "we're not doing anything wrong. This is a public space." Karen, however, was undeterred. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You're parked in a reserved spot. Don't think I haven't noticed. You need to move your car now, before I call the tow truck." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I had lived in this neighborhood for years, and I knew for a fact that there were no reserved spots in the parking lot. This was ridiculous. I was about to argue, but then something I couldn't ignore happened, something that made my blood run cold. Without warning, Karen reached out, her fingers closing around Sarah's arm. I didn't know what had come over her, but she yanked Sarah's arm hard, pulling her away from the car. "What the hell?" I shouted, feeling a rush of adrenaline. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was dragging my pregnant wife? Sarah gasped, trying to pull her arm free, but Karen wasn't letting go. I could see the panic in Sarah's eyes as she stumbled, her balance shaky as Karen's grip tightened. My heart dropped to my stomach. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was about something much more sinister. Karen wasn't just trying to enforce rules, she was acting like she had the right to control our lives. And now, she had crossed the line. I took a step forward, my body moving on instinct, but the sight of Karen dragging Sarah like this froze me in place for a moment. What kind of person did this? My mind raced, but I couldn't allow myself to be paralyzed by shock. I had to act. "Let go of her." I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. But Karen didn't even flinch. She just kept pulling. Sarah was clearly struggling to keep her footing, her face contorting with pain as she tried to hold herself together. This wasn't just a physical struggle, it was a mental one as well. I could see the fear in Sarah's eyes. I rushed forward, pushing past Karen's grip to get to Sarah. "Stop. Let go." I shouted again, my voice thick with emotion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Karen released her hold. Sarah stumbled back into my arms, gasping for air, clearly in shock. Her eyes were wide with confusion, and I could see the faint tremor in her hands. I was furious. I was livid. Who the hell did Karen think she was? And how dare she lay a hand on my wife like that? I wanted to scream, to confront her, but something told me to hold back. My first priority was making sure Sarah was okay. "Are you okay?" I whispered to Sarah, trying to steady her as she leaned into me. She nodded, though she was clearly shaken. But before I could say anything more, Karen spoke again, her voice dripping with venom. "You should be careful, you know," she said, her tone cold. "There are rules in this neighborhood. You don't want to mess with me. I'll make sure you regret it." And with that, she turned and stormed off, leaving us standing in the middle of the parking lot, my wife trembling in my arms. As Karen stormed off into the distance, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random outburst. There was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. I wrapped my arm around Sarah, guiding her carefully to the car. She was still shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But I knew this was no ordinary confrontation. This was something personal. And it all started long before today. Our neighborhood wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But for the most part, it was peaceful. People kept to themselves, there was a real sense of community, and everyone followed the rules. You didn't need to be on edge about the HOA, Homeowners Association, and no one seemed to mind the occasional dispute over fences or lawn care. It was suburban life at its most predictable. But that all changed when Karen took over the HOA board. At first, she seemed harmless enough. She had the typical enthusiasm of someone eager to make a difference. But soon, it became clear that her idea of making a difference meant making everyone's life miserable. The rules weren't just rules anymore. They became weapons in her arsenal. She was the self-appointed moral authority of the neighborhood, scrutinizing every detail, large or small, of people's lives. You see, Karen wasn't just the type to point out infractions quietly. No, she took it a step further. She loved making examples out of people. She would call out neighbors for parking too close to driveways, even when there was plenty of room. She'd knock on doors to tell people their grass was an eighth of an inch too long, and would even send complaint letters over the smallest things. It wasn't enough for her to enforce the rules. She relished in the power she had over people. For years, people had learned to avoid her. They avoided eye contact, kept their heads down when they saw her coming, and followed her every rule to the letter. Those who dared to challenge her were quickly silenced by her relentless attacks. Some neighbors moved away, unable to deal with the stress of constant scrutiny. Others found themselves locked in endless disputes over the most trivial things, all because Karen was determined to be the neighborhood's enforcer. I didn't know it at the time, but her obsession with control was about to turn much darker, and my wife and I were about to become her next victims. The first signs of trouble between Sarah and Karen had started months ago, well before today's shocking confrontation. It was one of those rare weekends where Sarah and I had a little time to ourselves. We decided to spend the day cleaning out our garage and organizing some boxes. The weather was beautiful, and for once, we didn't have anything pressing on our to-do list. The afternoon passed without incident, until Karen showed up at our door. She didn't knock. Instead, she simply stood in our driveway, hands on her hips, as though waiting for us to notice her. And we did. I remember this sinking feeling I got in my stomach when I looked up and saw her standing there, watching us from a distance. The last thing I wanted was to deal with her, but we didn't have a choice. She had this way of making you feel like you were doing something wrong, even when you weren't. You know, she said in her usual condescending tone, "The HOA board has been talking about the state of your driveway. It's getting a bit cluttered, don't you think?" I looked at the driveway, and then back at Sarah, who was equally confused. "It's just a few boxes, Karen," I replied, trying to stay calm. "We're cleaning up. There's nothing to be concerned about." But Karen wasn't hearing any of it. She pushed forward, her voice growing more shrill by the second. "You're not supposed to store things outside. There are rules in this neighborhood. If I were you, I'd move all of this into the garage, or I'll be forced to file a complaint with the HOA. My jaw tightened. We had just started organizing, and she was already threatening us? I wasn't about to back down so easily. "We're not doing anything wrong, Karen. It's just a few boxes. No one's going to complain about this." Her face twisted into that familiar scowl of hers. "Oh, you'd be surprised. The neighbors talk, you know. People have been noticing, and I'm not about to let things slide." That was it. I'd had enough. "Karen, you're overstepping. This isn't your business." But Karen wasn't backing down. She raised her chin, clearly enjoying the power trip. "I'm just doing my job," she said, as though that made everything she did acceptable. "And I'll make sure you're following the rules, whether you like it or not." After she left, I was left with a sense of unease. It was as if we were always being watched, and it wasn't just by Karen, it was by the whole neighborhood. Karen's influence stretched far beyond her own actions. She had a network of people who supported her, quietly agreeing with everything she did, no matter how out of line it seemed. And then, months later, the parking incident happened. I should have known it was coming. It felt like everything in this neighborhood had been leading up to it. Karen had been increasingly emboldened by the power she wielded, and she wasn't going to stop until she'd torn through every last shred of normalcy in our lives. It was no longer enough for her to ruin our weekends with petty complaints about our driveway. No, she wanted more. And she found a target in Sarah. The parking lot incident was only one of many. Karen had recently taken an interest in the parking arrangements for the entire neighborhood. With no real cause, she had started marking spaces with tape, demanding that people park only in specific spots. It was baffling. No one had ever complained about parking before. It was just one of those non-issues that Karen decided to make an issue. So, when Sarah parked in what had always been an open spot, Karen saw an opportunity to strike. She was going to show us who was in charge, just like she had done with everyone else. I should have known that it wasn't about parking. It was never about the parking. It was about control. It was about making sure we knew our place. After Karen left, I couldn't get the image of her dragging Sarah across the lot out of my head. I kept thinking about the look in Sarah's eyes, wide with confusion, fear, and disbelief. I had never seen my wife so vulnerable, so helpless. She was strong. She'd always been strong. But Karen had taken something from her that day, and I vowed to make sure she never did it again. I couldn't just stand by and let Karen continue to destroy everything we loved about our home. This was my family now, and I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA enforce or tear it apart. Now that you've heard what happened, I have to ask you, have you ever dealt with someone like Karen in your neighborhood? Drop your stories in the comments below. Let's see how many people have had to deal with this kind of toxic behavior. The tension in the air after Karen walked away was palpable. Sarah was still standing there, her face pale, her hands trembling. I wrapped my arm around her, guiding her back to the car, my mind racing with a mix of anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of protectiveness. I had never felt so helpless in my life. The nerve of that woman, grabbing my wife like that, dragging her across the parking lot as if she were some kind of criminal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to chase Karen down and demand an explanation. But what good would that do? She would just stand there, smug and unrepentant, telling me she was just doing her job like she had done to so many others before. No, this time it was different. This time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. As we reached the car, I opened the door for Sarah, helping her settle in. She still looked shaken, but she was trying to hold herself together. "I'm fine," she whispered, but I could hear the fear in her voice. "You're not fine," I said softly, my anger simmering just below the surface. "She had no right to do that to you." "No one does. We're calling the police, Sarah. We're filing a report." But Sarah shook her head. "No, we can't do that. It's just going to make things worse. I don't want to escalate it." I was taken aback. Sarah was usually the calm one, the level-headed one. If she was telling me not to take action, something was wrong. She had been a victim in this situation, and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Karen get away with this. "I don't care if it makes things worse," I said, my voice firm. "She assaulted you. That's a crime. I'm not going to let her walk away from this. If I don't do something, then who will?" But Sarah, despite her obvious distress, placed a hand on my arm and gave me a look that stopped me in my tracks. "Please don't. Let's just go home. We'll figure it out later." I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the toll the pregnancy had already taken on her. And I didn't want to push her any further. "All right," I said, my voice softer now, "but we're not letting this go. Not now, not ever." As I drove us home, my mind kept racing. What had just happened? I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind, the way Karen had grabbed Sarah, the way she had spoken to us like we were beneath her, as though her rules and her authority were the only things that mattered. Who the hell did she think she was? I wanted to drive straight to the HOA office, march in, and demand a meeting with the board. I wanted to demand that they remove her from her position, expose her for the bully that she was, but I couldn't just act on impulse. I had to think this through carefully. I needed to figure out how to make her see that she couldn't just walk all over us, that she couldn't drag my wife across a parking lot and get away with it. I needed to find a way to make it stick. When we got home, I helped Sarah inside. She was still quiet, lost in her thoughts, and I knew she wasn't ready to talk about it just yet. But I couldn't just do nothing. I had to start somewhere. I'm going to call some of the neighbors, I said, pulling out my phone. There's got to be someone who's seen what she's been doing. Someone who can back us up. Sarah looked at me, her expression tired but grateful. You really think it'll help? I have to try, I replied. We're not the only ones she's targeted. And if we let this slide, she'll keep doing it to others. I started making calls, reaching out to people I knew in the neighborhood, people who, like me, had been quietly fed up with Karen's reign of terror but hadn't known how to fight back. As I spoke to a few of the neighbors, I began to hear the same story over and over again. Karen had been harassing people for months, threatening fines for the smallest violations, sending letters about trivial things like the color of their shutters or how tall their grass was. One neighbor, Dave, even mentioned that Karen had once called the police on him because his garbage cans were left out too long, 2 days past the designated pickup day. It was starting to become clear to me that Karen was more than just a nuisance. She was a tyrant who had spent years creating a climate of fear and submission in our neighborhood. And the worst part, no one had ever stood up to her. People were afraid of the consequences, afraid of what she might do if they dared to cross her. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah being dragged across the parking lot, her face a mixture of fear and disbelief. I could hear Karen's voice in my head, demanding compliance, acting as if she owned the entire neighborhood. My blood boiled every time I thought about it. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront her directly. I had to show her that I wouldn't be intimidated, that I wasn't afraid of her. It was time to make my move. The next morning, I drove over to the HOA office. I had no appointment, but I wasn't going to wait for their approval. I was done being passive. Karen had crossed the line, and now it was time to make her pay. When I arrived, I saw Karen's car parked in the lot. My heart skipped a beat. She was here. It was time. I walked into the office and the receptionist, a young woman named Lisa, looked up in surprise. Can I help you? I need to speak with Karen, I said, my voice calm but firm. Now. Lisa hesitated for a moment, but then picked up the phone. She dialed the extension, and soon, Karen's voice came on the line. Karen, there's someone here to see you. I could hear the annoyance in Karen's tone as she picked up the phone. Who is it? It's me, I said, standing tall and steady. And I think we need to have a little talk. There was a pause on the other end, and then Karen's voice, much softer now, almost patronizing, said, What is this about? It's about yesterday, I said, my voice cutting through her defensiveness. You have no right to treat my wife like that. No right to lay a hand on her. I'm not going to let you get away with it. Karen was silent for a moment, and I could feel the tension building. She had no idea what was coming. The tension in the air that morning was almost unbearable. I could feel the weight of every second as I stood in front of Karen's office, the phone still warm in my hand. I had made up my mind. I wasn't just going to let her walk away from this. Not after what she had done. Not after she had dragged my pregnant wife across the parking lot, disregarding not only basic decency, but also the safety of my family. As I waited for her to come downstairs, I thought back to everything that had led up to this. For so long, Karen had been the untouchable figure in the neighborhood, the one who seemed to hold all the power, the one who decided who would be fined, who would get warnings, and who would face the wrath of the HOA. People had been afraid of her, and it was easy to see why. She had a reputation. She used her position to manipulate and control others, and everyone had quietly accepted it. But I wasn't going to quietly accept it anymore. A few moments later, I saw her walking down the stairs, her heels clicking against the floor, her expression as cold and calculating as ever. She wasn't startled to see me. If anything, she looked almost smug, as if she had already prepared herself for this confrontation. Well, she was wrong. She had no idea what she was about to face. Well, she said, crossing her arms over her chest, her lips curling into a thin smile. I assume you've come to apologize for your wife's behavior yesterday? My jaw tightened. The audacity of this woman was unreal. Did she really think this was just about some trivial disagreement? Did she really think I was here to apologize for something that was clearly her fault? No, I said, my voice steady but with an edge of coldness. I'm here to talk about your behavior. You don't get to drag my wife across a parking lot and treat her like that, Karen. You don't get to put your hands on her and think there won't be consequences. She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised that I wasn't backing down. Oh, and what are you going to do about it? You think you can scare me into submission? Her voice was dripping with mockery, but there was a faint flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had underestimated the situation. Was I really just another person Karen had bullied into submission over the years? But then I remembered Sarah's face, the fear, the helplessness, the way Karen had dragged her with no care for her condition. And that brought me back to the present. No, I wouldn't let her win. I don't need to scare you, I said, my voice low and controlled. You've crossed a line, Karen, and you're going to pay for it. She took a step forward, a challenging glint in her eyes. Oh, I see. You're just another angry neighbor looking to make a fuss over nothing. Trust me, I've dealt with plenty of your kind. You'll get over it, just like they all do. And in the meantime, you'll learn to respect the rules, just like everyone else around here. I stared at her, my anger rising with every word she spoke. But then something shifted inside me. She didn't know. She didn't know the one thing that could change everything. She didn't know that there was more at play here than just some HOA drama. It was time to make her see the truth. Here's the thing, Karen, I said, taking a step toward her, my voice hardening. You don't know who you're dealing with. And you've underestimated just how far I'll go to protect my family. Her face twisted into a sneer. What's that supposed to mean? Are you threatening me now? But I wasn't threatening her. I was about to reveal something that would shake her to the core. Something that would make her realize just how wrong she was to mess with us. You think you're in control here, that you can make the rules, intimidate people, and get away with it. But you don't know everything about us. You don't know what my wife is carrying. I paused for a moment, letting that sink in. I could see the flicker of confusion in her eyes as she tried to make sense of my words. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice suddenly losing some of its usual confidence. I leaned in closer, locking eyes with her. My wife is pregnant, Karen. You grabbed her, dragged her across the parking lot while she's carrying our child, and you didn't even notice. You didn't even care. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I saw Karen falter. She took a step back, her mouth slightly agape, as if she had just realized the enormity of what she had done. But she quickly regained her composure, though the hint of discomfort was still there. You're being dramatic, she snapped, though her voice wasn't as steady as before. It's just a little tug. She's fine. I'm sure the baby's fine, too. But I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she had made a critical mistake. The discomfort in her voice wasn't just a facade anymore. It was a crack in the armor she had carefully built around herself. You don't know that, I said, my voice sharp. You don't get to decide who's fine and who isn't. And you certainly don't get to make judgments about people's health, their families, their lives. Not when you've never bothered to listen. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in a long while, she was speechless. She had always prided herself on being the authority figure in the neighborhood, the one who controlled everything. But now, she had been forced to confront the reality of her actions and the consequences that came with them. I could see her mind working, processing what I had just revealed. She had been so wrapped up in her own sense of power that she had ignored the most basic human decency, the simple fact that my wife was carrying a child. And now that the truth was out in the open, there was no taking it back. I'm not going to let you get away with this, I said, my voice cold with resolve. You will answer for what you did. I'll make sure of it. I'll go to the HOA board, to the police if I have to. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are, what you're capable of. No one is going to tolerate this anymore, Karen. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but she quickly closed it again, her face a mix of anger and confusion. She had been caught off guard, and I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. This was no longer about rules and regulations. This was about her behavior, her disregard for basic human respect, and the consequences she would now have to face. "I'll be taking this to the board," I continued, standing taller, knowing that I had the upper hand now. "And I'm not stopping until justice is served." For the first time, Karen didn't argue. She didn't threaten me. She just stood there, silent and stunned. I could feel the weight of the moment hanging between us. The silence that followed my words felt like an eternity. I had expected Karen to react with the usual defensiveness, the refusal to admit fault. That was her style. She had always prided herself on being the neighborhood's enforcer, never apologizing, never admitting she was wrong. I had prepared myself for a fight, for a war of words, for her to dig in deeper and defend herself to the bitter end. But instead, I was met with something unexpected. After a long, awkward pause, Karen let out a slow breath. Her shoulders sagged, just slightly, as if the weight of what I had said was finally starting to land. She looked at me, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw something that almost resembled guilt in her eyes. "I didn't know," she said softly, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it before. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My initial reaction was disbelief. Did Karen of all people, just admit she was wrong? For years, she had bulldozed her way through the neighborhood, using her position on the HOA board to control everyone around her. She had never once shown any remorse for her actions, not even when she crossed the line time and time again. And yet here she was, standing in front of me, looking not so much defiant, but small. "I didn't know she was pregnant," Karen continued, her voice shaky now. I didn't see it. I thought she was just another person trying to take advantage of the parking spots." I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Karen? Apologizing? For a moment, I felt like I was in some alternate reality. But then I remembered Sarah's face, the fear in her eyes when Karen had grabbed her. This wasn't about parking. This wasn't about a minor violation. It was about an overstep, about someone using their power to hurt others. And even though Karen was admitting she was wrong, I wasn't ready to let her off the hook that easily. "You didn't see it?" I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Karen, she was 8 months pregnant. How could you not see that?" Karen's face turned red, and she looked away, clearly uncomfortable. She seemed to be struggling with something, some kind of internal battle. I could almost hear her trying to process what I had just revealed to her. After a few long moments, she spoke again, this time with a softness that I hadn't expected. "I should have been more careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so focused on my job, on keeping the neighborhood perfect, that I didn't stop to think about people. I let it get to my head. I thought the rules were the most important thing. But I was wrong. I see that now." I stood there, stunned. Was she really apologizing? Was she really acknowledging the hurt she had caused? A part of me wanted to scream, to demand more from her. This wasn't enough. This wasn't some mistake that could just be brushed off with an apology. My wife had been dragged across the parking lot, for God's sake. This wasn't something that could just be swept under the rug. But then something strange happened. I took a deep breath, and instead of pushing for more, I found myself softening. This wasn't the confrontation I had expected. It wasn't the fiery battle where I would demand justice at every turn. It was something else, something I hadn't anticipated. Could it be that Karen was actually capable of change? "I get it," I said slowly, my voice calmer now. "You've been in this position for so long, and maybe you've lost sight of what really matters. But just because you've been doing something for a long time doesn't mean it's right. You hurt my wife, Karen. You scared her. And you need to understand the impact of that." Karen nodded, her eyes brimming with a mixture of regret and shame. I do understand. And I want to make it right." I almost couldn't believe it. I had been prepared for an explosive argument, for Karen to double down on her behavior, to insist that she was in the right. Instead, she was acknowledging her mistake, genuinely trying to make amends. And that's when it hit me. This was an opportunity to not only hold her accountable, but to make sure that this didn't happen again. If Karen was truly willing to listen, maybe there was a chance that the cycle of power and control could finally be broken. I stepped back, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. If you really want to make it right, Karen, then there's more to do than just saying sorry. You need to step down from the HOA board. You've lost the trust of the community, and you need to prove that you're not above the rules, not above accountability. For a brief moment, I saw Karen's jaw tighten, her hands clenching at her sides. But she didn't argue. She didn't make excuses. Instead, she exhaled deeply, as if she were releasing years of pent-up frustration. Then, to my surprise, she spoke. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't deserve to be on the board anymore. I've let my power go to my head. I'll step down. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I stood there, stunned. I had expected a fight, a struggle, some sort of pushback. But Karen was genuinely offering to step down, to walk away from the position that had given her so much power. This wasn't just about an apology anymore. This was about growth. This was about change. And I had to admit, a small part of me felt impressed. But that's not enough. I said, my voice firm again. You also need to go to the HOA board and the community. You need to publicly apologize for what you did. You need to show them that you understand the harm you've caused and that you're committed to doing better. Karen swallowed hard, but nodded. I will. I'll do it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll do whatever I can to make things right. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the kind of justice I had envisioned, but it was a step in the right direction, and that's all I could ask for right now. I looked at her, my own anger fading slowly as I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was room for people to change, even Karen. All right, I said, finally letting go of some of the tension that had been coiled tightly in my chest. Then we'll let this go. But don't think for 1 second that I've forgotten what happened. You owe Sarah and me and this whole neighborhood a lot more than just an apology. Karen nodded, looking truly remorseful. I know. I'll make it right. As I turned to walk away, I realized something important. This wasn't just about holding someone accountable. This wasn't just about getting revenge or getting even. It was about giving people the chance to change, to acknowledge their mistakes and make amends. Karen wasn't perfect, but this was a step in the right direction, and that was enough for now. The morning after my conversation with Karen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had shifted. The tension that had clouded my thoughts for days, even weeks, had dissipated, but the reality of what had just happened still weighed heavily on me. Karen's apology, her promise to step down from the HOA board, had been an unexpected turn of events. It had caught me off guard, and though I had insisted on her making it right, I couldn't help but wonder if this was all too good to be true. I spent the morning pacing, trying to process everything. Sarah was still recovering from the shock of being manhandled by Karen the day before, but she seemed a little more at ease. We had both hoped that things would be different, that Karen would be forced to take responsibility for her actions. I kept replaying our conversation in my mind. Did Karen mean what she said? Would she really go through with it? Or was this just another empty promise, another way to placate me, to keep me from escalating things further? I decided I wasn't going to wait and wonder. I had to see for myself. The next afternoon, I drove over to the HOA office. It wasn't that far from our house, just a short 5-minute drive, but it felt like the longest drive I had taken in a long time. My mind raced as I pulled into the parking lot. It was eerily quiet, as if everyone was waiting for the storm to hit. I could feel the weight of this moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about Sarah or Karen. It was about the whole neighborhood, the whole community that had been living under Karen's oppressive rule for so long. I had to make sure this wasn't just some fleeting gesture. I walked up to the front door of the HOA office and pushed it open. The sound of the door, creaking as it swung open, was almost like a warning, like I was stepping into something unknown, something that would change everything. Inside, the small office was exactly how I remembered it, sterile, quiet, and cold. The receptionist, Lisa, looked up at me as I walked in. Her eyes flickered with recognition, but she didn't say anything. I'm here to see Karen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lisa's eyes widened just slightly, but she nodded and picked up the phone. She dialed the extension, and soon Karen's voice came through the line. Karen, you have a visitor, Lisa said, her tone almost apologetic. Send him in? Karen's voice came through, sharp and impatient. I made my way down the narrow hallway, toward her office. As I approached the door, I felt my pulse quicken. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would Karen still be defiant, or was she really going to follow through with her promises? I knocked once, and before Karen could say anything, I opened the door. She was sitting behind her desk, just as I had imagined, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface. The moment I stepped inside, she looked up, and for a moment I saw the same cold, calculating expression she had worn every time I'd encountered her before. But this time, there was something different. There was a hint of fear in her eyes, a subtle nervousness that wasn't there before. Ah, you're here, she said, her tone forced and formal. Please have a seat. I didn't sit. I stood there, arms crossed, trying to keep my emotions in check. I came to see if you meant what you said yesterday. I said, my voice low and steady. You promised to step down from the board, to apologize to the community. I want to see you follow through on that. Karen's eyes shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. She stood up, walked over to the desk, and grabbed a folder from a drawer. As she pulled it out, I could tell that she was trying to maintain her composure, but I wasn't about to let her hide behind that facade anymore. I've already made the decision, Karen said, her voice wavering just slightly. I'll be stepping down from the board. I'm going to send an email to the entire neighborhood. I'll admit my mistakes and explain what happened. I'll tell them I was wrong. I stood there, not sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her. Maybe this was real. Maybe she was finally understanding the impact of her actions. But another part of me couldn't let my guard down just yet. This wasn't enough. She had to do more than send an email. She had to do something public, something that would show the neighborhood that she couldn't just get away with her actions. That's a start, I said, my voice sharp, but it's not enough. You need to meet with the residents. You need to stand in front of the people you've hurt, apologize in person. That's the only way you're going to regain their trust. Karen's face tightened, and for a moment I thought she might refuse. But then, to my surprise, she sighed heavily and nodded. You're right, she said, her voice quieter now. I'll do it. I'll arrange a meeting. I'll meet with the neighbors face to face. I'll explain myself. I'll take responsibility for what I did. I couldn't believe it. I had been prepared for a fight, but instead, Karen was agreeing to everything I asked. It was almost too much to process. Was this the same woman who had terrorized this neighborhood for years? Was this really happening? I looked at her, studying her face, trying to read her sincerity. Something in her expression told me she wasn't just agreeing because she had to. She was truly humbled. She wasn't hiding behind her usual arrogance. She knew the power she had abused, and she was really trying to make things right. All right, I said, finally, my voice softer now. But just remember, this doesn't fix everything. This is just the first step. You need to prove that you can be trusted, that you'll never let your position go to your head again. You need to show everyone that you understand the damage you've caused. Karen nodded again, this time without hesitation. I understand. I know it won't be easy to gain back everyone's trust, but I'm going to try. I promise. I stood there for a moment weighing her words. There was still a part of me that wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a small sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't just an empty gesture. Maybe Karen really was going to change. Maybe there was a chance that the neighborhood could heal from all the damage she had caused. I'll hold you to that, I said, turning to walk out of her office. As I stepped out of the building, I took a deep breath. The weight of the situation had finally started to lift. It wasn't over yet. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and that was more than I could have asked for. So, what do you think? Do you believe people can truly change, or do you think Karen's apology is just a temporary fix? If you've ever dealt with someone like Karen, how did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories and see how you'd approach a situation like this. And hey, if you found this story eye-opening, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more stories about standing up for what's right, confronting tough situations, and holding people accountable. Share this video with your friends and family, and let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can make sure no one gets away with mistreating others, and maybe even inspire change where it's needed most. Thanks for watching. Let's keep fighting for fairness one story at a time.